INFJ silliness is something that few people really get to enjoy. It manifests itself in a variety of ways. Some of them include extemporaneous rap songs, poems, original puns, creative stories, and just general playfulness, among other things. There are really three factors that are necessary to enjoy an INFJ silliness. If you'd like to learn more about your INFJ personality, then I'd love to give you a free copy of my book, The INFJ Personality Guide. In the book, you'll learn about the mindsets that motivate you and cause you to do what you do as an INFJ. And hopefully you'll come away with an understanding that you're not messed up or broken, but just different, and the world needs your gifts. So grab a copy of that book by visiting infjbook.com and get your free copy there. And the first of which is timing. INFJs need a certain time, usually, to really show their silliness. And one key time is when they're ready to relax. That's often after a long day of work or when they finish an important project. They feel the weight of responsibility removed from their shoulders. Now, it doesn't have to just be at one of those times. Sometimes they interject it and little tidbits throughout the day, like in a text message or an email or an interaction with a coworker whom they trust or a family member, what have you. But it shows up in larger capacities at the right time. And sometimes too, and I didn't mention this one before, but sometimes too, it's like when they're on vacation or at the end of a school semester or whatever it is, when they're just able to let down, again, that weight of responsibility and relax. Another key factor is when they are in the right place. And this isn't necessarily like location based as far as where you are in the world. What I mean by it is more, do they feel like they're in a safe environment? Sometimes that's their home where they feel comfortable. Often extroverts are willing to be more open and volunteer more about themselves wherever they are, as opposed to introverts who may open up and seem to become extroverted at home just because they feel safe and they're willing to gab and go on and on and on. Maybe you've experienced this yourself. Not that you can't be that way at times in public, but the right environment often is a place where they feel comfortable. Now, it can be actually when they go to a place they've never been before, like to another city or state or country. Maybe they feel safe just because nobody knows them and they're willing to let their guard down there and be a bit more silly. The third factor is probably the most important, and this comes down to emotional safety. INFJs are willing to open up and be more silly when they are with the right people. And the right people are usually close friends, family, or coworkers. If you want to be the type of person that gets to enjoy an INFJ's silliness, then you need to prove it over time by being faithful and being vulnerable. And if you are consistently both of those things, you generally can gain an INFJ's trust as long as you are a safe person. And if you're a safe person, you're likely going to get to see the silly side of the INFJ. For the past 4 months, I've been carpooling to work with a coworker who lives about a mile away. Typically, I've ridden to work by myself, but I had injured my knee and I needed a ride, and it was great that we could carpool together. So initially, I started just by asking questions and listening because that's what I felt comfortable with. And my coworker was an extrovert, actually an ENFP, and we got along pretty well. But again, I felt more comfortable just asking questions and listening. But as we rode together almost every day, I became more and more comfortable and felt safer with this coworker because he was pretty vulnerable, especially about some of the challenges that he has been going through with big life changes. And I began volunteering things about myself, like some of the raps that I was writing for students at school where I was teaching, and some other things about my life. And again, as I felt safe, I felt like I could begin to open up with him and share some things that were going on that revealed more about me and what I really value. And we've actually had some pretty deep conversations, but it just took time and progressive trust for me to open up and connect on a deeper level with him. But now we enjoy a pretty close relationship, and we often joke around on the way to and from work. What flavors an INFJ's humor and silliness is intuition. It leads again to that creative storytelling, imaginative wordplay, songs, raps, and interesting connections that many other people don't think about. And this is the stuff that makes a lot of comedy. If you look at a lot of comedians, they are often intuitives. They see connections and perspectives that a lot of people don't see. And when you hear about them, you see the irony in what they're saying and see, again, that unique perspective that maybe never thought of before that really makes you laugh. A lot of comedians are actually extroverted intuitives. There are some introverted intuitives for sure, but a lot of those comedians enjoy extroverting their intuition and getting up in front of other people and sharing their intuition and really pulling together what's happening in the moment to say something funny. Whereas INFJs, who are introverts, tend to introvert their intuition. They don't just tend to do it, they introvert their intuition. So they tend to keep it within themselves, but they may actually share it with their families with whom they trust. So this same stuff, the same seeds that are in that extroverted intuition that a lot of stage comedians share is in the INFJ. And that can lead to some really hilarious moments at home where the INFJ feels safe. But again, it may also manifest itself in the form of a song. I've really enjoyed writing songs for family members and some coworkers to celebrate a birthday or a special event. And I like to pull together specifics about the person's life and habits that I've observed over time that people seem to think I miss. And I like to put them together in a way that's kind of surprising and that people who really know that person can laugh about and enjoy. And doing so is a lot of fun for me. Now, ultimately, the style of an INFJ's humor has a lot to do with where he or she grew up and the people with whom he or she spends time, because we're all influenced by the people that we spend the most time with. There's no doubt about that. But certainly there's an aspect of introverted intuition that influences how INFJs see the world and the humorous connections that they make. You may wonder why INFJs are so private then. Why do they keep this hilarious side or the silly side of themselves to themselves? And really I can think of two main reasons. One, again, is the way that they're energized. Now, an extrovert really tends to crave interactions and lots of interactions with people. And it can be people that person knows, or it's okay for really extroverted people to enjoy interactions with people they may not even know well and groups of people because they get charged up again from interacting with others. That's not the case for the introverted INFJ. They wouldn't really be energized by meeting a lot of people. In fact, they'd probably tend to shy away from that. Instead, and by contrast, they'd really be energized by maybe a coaching or a counseling session, either professionally or personally with a friend, where they really delve deep into what's motivating the person and help that person identify obstacles that are in the way of growing. When they get down to the meaty stuff of life or the whys and the hows of the way things really are, they're energized by those sorts of conversations, even with people maybe that they don't know, and especially if they're in small groups or in one-on-one conversations, but especially if they're with people that they do know and trust, that sort of conversation energizes them. So INFJs need people too, but they're not energized by large groups and quick, fast interactions with people that they don't know well, at least not most of the time. There are certainly exceptions, but the majority of the time, that sort of interaction is draining. So they tend to keep that silly side of themselves to themselves and close people that they know where they are most comfortable. The other day, I shared a song with a coworker that I'd written for him because he had told us this saga about a fridge that he'd bought that only lasted a couple weeks and that he'd been waiting a month to replace, and he had to use a college fridge. Anyway, I turned the whole thing into a song because he told us about it for like 3 days in a row, and I had a lot of fun doing it. But he then turned and shared it with my coworkers, and actually I was really appreciative that he did that because it was fun for my coworkers to see that other side of me, and I enjoyed it. But it took a toll on me. It actually drained a lot of my energy, or it was taxing, I should say. While I was happy they got to know me better, just sharing that part of me that I'd kept private for so long was kind of draining. So at the end of the day, while I was energized on some level that they'd really gotten to know and appreciate that side of me, I was drained that I had to share it with people that maybe I didn't know quite as well as this other coworker for whom I'd written this song. So there's always a challenge with sharing a certain side of you with other people. And the second reason why INFJs are private that I can think of is that they are sensitive to criticism. You know, people may really enjoy the silliness that they share, but they could also be critical of it and put the INFJ down, even playfully. And the INFJ, even if the other person's putting him or her down playfully, might take things too personally, which isn't a good thing. So what most INFJs tend to do is test the emotional waters. And if they don't feel safe, they curl up like a hedgehog protecting its soft parts, just to keep those parts of themselves private and protect themselves from any criticism. But at the same time, if the environment feels like a safe place, using their intuition, they can pick this up pretty fast. They may open up really speedily and trust somebody and get down to who they really are if it's, again, a safe relationship. So a lot depends on how the INFJ feels. We can learn a lot more about why INFJs are the way they are by looking at personality clues. Most people know that the INFJ personality, like all of the 16 Myers-Briggs personality types, is made up of 4 preferences. The INFJs are introversion, intuition, feeling, and judging. But a lot of people don't know that every personality type also has 4 cognitive functions. And these cognitive functions are like mindsets or preferred ways of processing the world and making decisions, taking in information. So the INFJs' cognitive functions are introverted intuition, extroverted feeling, introverted thinking, and extroverted sensing. And they're arranged in a hierarchy. So the first one is most dominant and influential. In fact, we call it the dominant function. And the last one is the least influential. It's definitely part of the personality. It plays an important role, but it's just less developed, and it's called the inferior function. So in the INFJ's personality type, the dominant function is introverted intuition, and the inferior function is extroverted sensing. And interestingly, these two together form the INFJ's silliness and playfulness. And when you look at the INFJ's introverted intuition, this is where a lot of that imagination and those interesting connections and perspectives come from, where the wordplay comes from, just a lot of the creativity. The extroverted sensing, by contrast, excels at being in the moment and enjoying life, among other things. So if you look at introverted intuition, you'll see people or personality types like INTJs and INFJs using it extremely well because it's their dominant function. By contrast, if you look at the extroverted sensing, you'll see types like ESFPs and ESTPs using that really well because it's their dominant function. So people appreciate those INTJs and INFJs in the way, again, that they make connections and that they are insightful, they're resourceful, they're great at researching. And people appreciate the ESFPs and ESTPs for the way that they are able to perform up on the stage or react in the moment, whether they're helping somebody on the scene as a first responder or using tools in a masterful way. They're just excellent, even as athletes. There are a lot of benefits to extroverted sensing too. But when you pair the two together, you get a pretty amazing combination that, again, can produce some pretty hilarious results. So an INFJ starts out by pulling in information about the environment around him or her with that extroverted sensing, just picking up on concrete sensory clues about the physical environment and making observations about other people around him or her. Again, probably very subconsciously. And then the introverted intuition takes that information and makes interesting connections, observes certain perspectives, and maybe uses words to process it and put it all together in a fun way. And again, if you are using those two together, that's where you get some of that creativity that you might see in a comedian, or just some of the imagination that you see. If you're just seeing a silly INFJ, well, that might just be largely extroverted sensing, where they're really playful and they're playing with kids. And that's also something that I forgot to mention earlier when I was talking about the 3 factors. People, when we're thinking about people, INFJs often feel really comfortable around kids because kids don't judge, they just accept, and they like to play and have fun. So an INFJ might feel really comfortable being silly with kids. But getting back to what we're talking about, that NI and SE put together, the introverted intuition and extroverted sensing, makes some really fun, humorous interactions and provide some fun outcomes for the INFJ. Now, why do we not see that extroverted sensing silliness all the time? Well, the big reason is that, again, introverted intuition is the dominant function of the INFJ. It's the most influential one. And really the second most influential cognitive function or mindset is extroverted feeling, which loves to help and serve other people with that insight, those connections, that resourceful information, the research, all of that together. So INFJs by default have spent a lot of time with their preferred function, introverted intuition. So they've developed the ability to collect helpful information, to teach others with it, to see insights and make connections that are beneficial to others. So they prefer, and by default, will tend to be more serious and caring most of the time because that's what they're best at and that's where they're most comfortable. But in those really laid back moments when they're with people that they trust, when they're feeling comfortable, you might see more of that silliness. And it's a good thing too, because the silliness might help to ease relationships, especially with sensing types, which may not want to get deep into the whys and hows of the universe that the INFJ so much enjoys. Sometimes they just want a laid back, approachable INFJ, and humor can do a lot in that arena. And it can also help an INFJ help somebody relax when they're feeling tense. It can add some levity to a heavy situation when an INFJ is able to interject some needed humor. Generally, as INFJs mature and as time passes, INFJs feel more comfortable in their own skin, especially if they've had a healthy environment in which they've lived and grown up. So they're more free to open up and be themselves with others because they realize that other people aren't thinking about them and judging them so much as those other people are thinking about themselves and what people are thinking of them. So the INFJ is quicker to think less about himself or herself and more quickly able to think about others, which is great because other people need to hear your perspective. They need the INFJ perspective like they need all personality types perspectives. We need each other, but you definitely need to share your perspective with the world. And the world could definitely benefit from more of your humor. Thanks so much for tuning into the show today. If you have thoughts, I'd love to hear them. Drop a comment down below if you've been watching this as a YouTube video, or feel free to send me an email or leave a review if you're a podcast listener. Thanks so much for this idea and for your review on the podcast, Emerson A. It was an awesome idea and I really appreciate it. And I'm sorry it took me so long to see it and to use it in this show, but I appreciate it. And thank you so much for listening. I'm looking forward to seeing you on the next show.